Hey guys, it's the one and only TKA, also known as Apollo in these circles. And today I'll be giving a video just specifically just talking about debate in generally. Well, this video is not scripted, this is just merely me talking off the top of my head, really. So, my perspectives, my opinions, well, not even opinions, but rather the facts about what's really going on here. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to talk about just the state of the debates in currently, before even delving into what truly makes someone a good debater, which is what the vast majority of debaters lack currently. So when I talk about the debating community, I'm talking about the community on TikTok, on Discord, and you could even consider certain streaming platforms, like even, Twitch, for example, where you have Twitch debaters, or you have debaters that gets featured on certain YouTube platforms, YouTube streaming platforms. Jubilee is one example. Now, I'd like to delve into starting off with the Jubilee debating community, or just that specific circle. With the Jubilee debating circle, majority of the debaters that gets featured on Jubilee, as the vast majority of normal people can tell, are just not good debaters. And not only are they just not good debaters, but they're just unintelligent, period. Even outside of debating, like even if you take away their debating skill, they're just not an intelligent person. They don't think properly, and they appeal to emotions plenty of times as a basis of the argument and use this dishonest rhetoric. If you take into account Mehdi Hassan's debate, for example, recently against those ultra-right conservatives, that's a perfect epitome of what really happens in that circle. You have open racists on the platform, and it's just really questions, or rather, it brings me to asking the question: why do they feature these people on the platform or on these platforms? On TikTok, it's kind of like around the same level. I would say it's even the same level because the vast majority of debaters that gets featured on Jubilee are actually from TikTok. Not good debaters, can't reason properly, never really know what they're talking about, but yet still they speak on topics with a really, really large amount of confidence. And it kind of tells you what type of people they are, But with that being said, Jubilee and TikTok, that's just basically kind of like the same type of debaters, all the confidence, but zero intelligence whatsoever. No good reasoning ability, no knowledge on the topic, no sort of true good faith debating ability or tactics that are ever being employed. They just, always resort to, you could say, unwarranted, non-productive interruptions to speak over the person, to basically trap them into their rhetorical frame control, as people like to call it. Now, when it comes to those communities, insofar as the quality of those debaters, right, if you compare that section of the debating circle to the Discord debating circle, I would say the Discord debating circle is better. They are more evidence. They're more evidence driven. They are more driven by logic. They're more driven by the facts, the hard proof. But as of recent times, especially, the Discord circles have been getting contaminated with a bunch of subhuman filth, which they call themselves different syndicates, basically. This is like the filth that's contaminated in the community currently. There are a couple of syndicates, just to name a few. You have like different sections of the comms, basically, or of the circle on Discord. You have the trans syndicate, basically. You have like a specific group of people who unironically changes over to being transgender because of one guy on Discord. Kind of really strange to me, changing your whole gender identity for a Discord debater. They know themselves, and the debater that motivates them to change over is Seth, which is a pretty good debater himself, but at the same time, it's like you have these people who are just blinded by who really wins the debate. So when they see this sort of, you could say, transgender type messiah, because that's basically how they view Seth in their eyes, debate someone, they would vote for Seth, or they would say that this guy won, but never actually evaluate who really won the debate, really. That's just mainly the syndicate status. They make claims on who wins, but they never really back it up. You have that circle, that syndicate, really, and then you have other different syndicates. You have the Infinity Syndicate, you have the Jara Syndicate, you have the, what's it called? Oh yeah, the Brother Syndicate, whatever they are. But as I said, the common trend within the current Discord circle, even though the Discord debaters, these debaters are more evidence-driven, at least in their debates, they are more, you could say, logical, or not really logical, but rather they are focused mainly, or in comparison to the other side of the debating community, they're more focused on the logical aspect of debates. At the same time, they are equally as bad faith as the TikTok and the Jubilee type debaters I was talking about previously in this little monologue. Insofar as the bad faith part about it is simply that if you look at like all of these syndicates, even if you place into consideration the Clorox or Sean syndicate, for example, what really happens is, in contrast to the prior Discord debating community, when you had Trini, you had Seth, you had these debaters who debates, for example, they basically have their sort of like argumentative or rhetorical clash in debates. And usually what happens is, I mean, of course, you're going to have biases towards particular debaters. Even me, myself, faces this. I face this. Like, there are debaters who are biased towards me. And of course, there are a lot of debaters biased against me. But if you look into what's really going on, okay, when, for example, Jaro and Infinity debate, for instance, okay, or any of these debaters from these syndicates debate, what really happens is, first and foremost, the quality of their debates are completely horse-piss. The rhetoric, not really good articulation on both ends from people of these syndicates, not good at speaking properly. If you put these debaters in a public speaking platform, they'll get laughed at, really. Not to mention, they don't have the sort of argumentation that you'd expect from people who act this confidently, nor do they have the topic knowledge. But even ignoring that, if, for instance, you have Infinity and Jaro debate, for example, and Infinity beat Jaro objectively, like that's literally what's happened. Let's just say that this happens, right? Even if this was to happen, hypothetically speaking, I should say, it would still be the case that the Jaro syndicate is going to say that Jaro won, and of course, Infinity syndicate is going to say Infinity won. Now, the vast majority of people who would be saying Jaro won, if not all of them, no, every single one of them, if you ask any of these persons, okay, give us an explanation as to why it is the case that you think Jaro won, for example, they won't give an explanation. They'll play these sort of like optic games, whereas they say, hey, oh, you're pressed about my opinion, you're pressed, play those little mind games. They try to, rage bait you into saying, you're pressed and you care about my opinion, or they would say that they don't need to explain themselves, or they use all sorts of manipulative ducking strategies to evade giving an explanation for their judgment. So people like these, for example, who gives their opinions but never explains why it is correct, are the types of people whose opinions you should not care about. They're completely not credible, and have 0% credibility whatsoever. But this applies to basically every one of these syndicates, which brings me to asking this question, which is simply, why do they really do this? Well, the answer is pretty conspicuous, right? The reason is because none of these debaters want to actually take the true means or the true path to becoming an actual high tier. Because first and foremost, they're intellectually impoverished. They don't have the intellect to become a true high tier debater. So they try to take the shortcut. They get people to say they're good and use this as some sort of advertisement strategy. Okay? They advertise themselves to give people the false narrative, to sell the false narrative that they're good debaters when they really aren't. When I started debating, how I became a high tier, or the best debater, of course, and how people acknowledged me to be the best, I got beaten up multiple times. I got beaten up by Spencer. I got beaten by Six multiple times. I got beaten by Jojo. The list goes on. I got beaten up plenty of times by plenty of different debaters from the fiction debating community and even in the philosophy community. And unlike these debaters who would get thrashed objectively and then sell the narrative that they won, instead of actually becoming better, what I do instead is I always look back on my recording, even up to now. Even though I'm always winning debates right now, I'm never losing debates or getting pressed by any of these low tiers. I'm always looking back on the recording. Okay, where did I really go wrong here? What could I have done better? These debaters, no, they're not like that. They don't aim towards getting better, but they take the shortcut. Selling false narrative to do all this weird stuff. Like, for example, if you look at my debates with these debaters, funnily enough, what happened today when I debated this guy named C, you'd have like instances where I'll give an argument for a claim, or rather, I'll ask him to give an argument for a claim. And he would literally say, well, you appeal to intuitions or something, and then go against that standard, and then just use a bunch of insults, a whole bunch of insults towards the person instead of giving an argument. And then when that same opponent gives an argument, he literally says, that's dumb for points. That's something uninteresting. I'm just going to respond to it. And you look back at these responses and you're like, okay, he's just merely dismissing the point as being dumb, and he's just saying that he's not interested in addressing it. And you're telling me that people thinks that's convincing? Well, no one really thinks that's convincing, right? And that's just one of a plethora of examples of clear, obvious bias. No one really thinks that this is convincing or this is emblematic of what a winner would look like in a debate. However, they have to push a narrative, they have to sell an agenda, which is why even in my comment section, when I debate Arianas or when I debate Bridge or all of these debaters, you have these specific users who consistently pops up in this comment section, which I don't have to name because they know themselves, who would vote against me or who would say I lost a debate without even watching a second of the debate. It's the same persons, you know. It's like they have to push that sort of anti-Paul agenda, which is it's just strange. And I'm not the only person they've done this towards. You know, they have done this towards D1, D1 who literally has the best feats out of every current fiction debater that I know of currently, right? They did the same to D1, Gias, plenty of debaters. It's one of the reasons as to why people like Trini and all of these debaters like Six, all of these debaters, they don't want to have any association with this slum of a community, as you want to call it, because it's just really terrible. It's no longer skill-based, but it's mainly syndicate-based. It's like who has the most dick slurpers, basically, who has the most dick munchers. That's really just it currently, right? No matter how obvious Infinity was to beat Jaro or vice versa, right? There's always going to be this sort of like opinions on both ends that both of these debaters want. The people of, let's say, Infinity's syndicate will never acknowledge that he lost, even though he actually lost and vice versa. And I'm just using these two debaters as examples, you know, but just to point out a couple more things, right, before, you know, I end this to the monologue of this video. First time doing this video, by the way, this type of video, but I think I'm doing pretty well in this. But regarding the uprise of certain things, the one thing is simply the main reason as to why I'm the type of person who is hated, for example, is because another thing this community hates is brutal honesty. They don't like someone who is brutally honest with them. So, for example, Shinra, Jaro, I would say, who else? Vortex, just a couple of random low tiers. I could continue listing at least 20 more, but that'll be a waste of my time, breath, really. But just to focus on these ones for now, you know. The thing is that they're expecting someone to be sucking up to them. They're expecting someone to be saying that, hey, this person is the best or something like that. Or this person is, or you're better than this person. Now, when I make a tier list, for example, or when I give my opinions on who's truly a good debater and who's truly not a good debater, it offends a lot of people. And the people who it does in fact offend forces them to change their beliefs about me, insofar as they truly believe that Apollo is this level debater or Apollo being this person, but because Apollo has, you know, got into their fifis, they cope with this by pushing false agendas. It goes so far, and this is the similarity, the commonality between this community and the TikTok community. They have this cancel culture type approach to, again, cope with their lack of debating ability. So they would make up agendas, you know, use out of context, flawed, fake screenshots to kind of try to hurt the person's reputation because they can't hurt the person's arguments or debate skill when they're debating that person. It's the most obvious code. So, for example, you'd have like, you know, the pedophilic accusations that they made towards me. And I'm not the only person they've done this stuff towards, you know. It's just indicative of the intellectual fraudulence that's prevalent in this community, which is why, as I've said previously, literally every single debater of the community on Discord, with the exception of a very few from the philosophy community, are just like they're really atrocious at debating. And they'll never become better because of the same approach they're using, the syndicate approach. So that's basically the strategy, the optical strategy that they used as a copium methodology. As it relates, though, to the other parts, you know, regarding what I was saying, the coping with the careless stuff and how they could push agendas. Yeah, I mean, those persons are just a couple of examples. You have people like Jin Youngism, just a couple of goons, random. So you won't really, anyone who is not a part of these circles won't know them and really and truly would not care about them if they actually heard their debates, given the fact of how low tier it actually is. It's just, you know, bleed to the air. You know, these debaters, they change their beliefs based off, you know, if they're cool with this person or if this person glazes them and vice versa. And these are just a few of, let's say, over 40 people who I know, for example, changes their beliefs. Not just about me, but just in general. Changes their belief about someone's skill just based on their sort of like receptiveness from that person's end. So far as if that person's friendly towards them or if that person says they win all their debates. But of course, I'm brutally honest, and people don't like brutal honesty in this community. So yeah, that's really just it. But I mean, just to end this debate, that's funny. But just to end this video off, I would like to just give tips of how to become a good debater. This is just basically just the last section, you know, which I would say to become a good debater, like what really constitutes a good debater is, of course, having great argumentation. All right, so that means the arguments you're delivering is sound. So you're able to give sound arguments and so forth. So you're able to show why your position is more likely to be the case, which is one form of argumentation, which is known as probabilistic argumentation. Or you give another type of argumentation which demonstrates why your position is definitely the case, beyond the reason of doubt. It's certainly the case. That's one step, one attribute or characteristic of an objectively good debater. Another characteristic is having good rhetoric. Rhetoric is split into multiple different categories, but the ones I'll be focusing on here is frame control. Frame control determines optimal presence. So you have to make sure you're in control of the conversation. You have control of the tempo of the conversation, and you can use what is called a tone fluidation as one thing which helps you with this. So when you have a complete command and master of the tone, for example, when to slow down, when to speak fast, when to emphasize on certain words to communicate a given concept more effectively, these things helps your rhetoric. It demonstrates to the audience who's truly in control of the conversation, who truly knows what they're talking about. And sadly, none of these debaters really have a clue of what that really is. The one-liners is something which is a good aspect of rhetoric, alongside frame control, having a good control of the conversation and what points you're on. The strategy that me as the best debater always uses, which people don't catch on to, and which debaters should always try to use in their debates, is this is one of the tactics I always use. When you're debating someone, the goal should be to minimize the amount of burdens you have and to maximize the amount of burdens they have. Make sure that they are the ones doing more of the answering and not more of the questioning. Because when that happens, then you're going to be in a situation where you're in control. You're the one who is always on the attack. When they are always on the defense, then they always appear to be more reactive. And when you appear to be more reactive, you'll never appear as if you're in control. You see, debate is always a mind game. You have to basically be investigating into the audience's psychology, what makes it appealing to these people, and then investigate into the psychology of the opponents, make them feel insecure. You can perhaps ridicule them a couple of times, but not all the times. Don't just do it if they're being respectful. But if they're not being respectful, which happens in 99% of debates, ridicule and mockery definitely helps in making them feel insecure. It makes them doubt themselves. You can even ask them if they're confident in the points, if they confidently believe in what they're saying right now. These questions, these probing questions, it actually makes them consider and recontemplate whether or not they're actually saying something which makes sense, or if they're just spewing a whole bunch of nonsense. So that's just one aspect of rhetoric, really, or a couple of aspects of rhetoric. Of course, the main thing which you require to basically have good control of these sort of tactics is delivery, articulation, fluency, which again, the majority of these debaters don't have. 95% of these debaters cannot speak on the public platform, and nor have they ever done any public certain type debates. I've done that in real life, right? They can't speak that well. The articulation is not there. They have a lot of flawed pronunciations, a lot of stutters, a lot of stumbles, and their vocabulary is just really poor for someone who's a debater. For you to be a great debater and to have a really good rhetoric, you have to have a very expansive vocabulary, number one, right? So those are basically the things of having good delivery, and not to mention, as I've said previously, intonation, which is basically tone manipulation, like what I just did a while ago, right? You have to basically know when specifically to emphasize on a word, and that would basically draw the audience's attention to that word, which communicates a key concept, which is fundamental to the argument in the dialectic itself. And that's just a very summarized, a comprehensive overview of what really determines a good debater. But anyways, that's basically it. My first video like this, me giving or expressing my opinions, which aren't even opinions, but just facts, obviously, as to the state of affairs of the debating circles that exist currently, as well as the debaters and the sort of people who participate in these circles, and not to mention how to be a good debater. But I think my next video, perhaps, or a video that I might make in the future, is me delving more deeply into how to really become a good debater, and delving more deeply into strategies, tactics, and sort of you could say, tips on how to augment and increase the competency of these respective debating areas. So it'll be more informative, not as summarized as this current version. So I think this was definitely a good video. And if you like the video, of course, you can just like and share and definitely subscribe, because there's definitely more to come. Until then, peace.